And now I'm going to share. Can you see that, everyone?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, good. Got it right. Okay, so yeah, I'm Jane. I was a bit thrown then by that reference to being filmed, because that was a while back, wasn't it? That was about my mum, I think. There are lots of you in this room who are marketers, so this is not meant to be by any means a formal presentation. This was Matthew needing someone to fill the first New Year slot, and I said I'd do a bit on press releases. Hence it's called New Year. And we all talked last week about what we wanted to do this year and the ideas we were having for improving things generally. And I didn't really say anything about that very much, but I will say it as part of my introduction, which is to a small locally based marketing consultancy and agency. So I've been in marketing just about all of my career. And we talked a bit last week about what did people want to happen into the future? Are they building or sort of holding? And I've realized that I'm kind of holding. I want my business to suit my life really now. But one of the things I love doing is talking about marketing and applying the marketing principles to all sorts of situations. And I'm very curious about lots of businesses. So I would always like to say to you all that if you ever fancy having a chat about any aspect of marketing, I'll be very happy to do that. And the other thing to mention is that we have the Lymington.com online media channels, which are very much a kind of community thing, as well as a way of promoting local businesses to a wider market. And that kind of builds a little bridge into PR. Almost for my own benefit, I'm just summarizing what I said I'd do in this session. And as you'll see, I've highlighted the word writing and also local and regional, and part of the mix and how it can help with some of your other marketing. Now I've got to remember how to. Right. So I wouldn't be a marketing person if I didn't want to give some kind of a structure to all of this. So I've got sort of 5 key components of PR to talk about in relation to press releases. I'm not actually going to talk about distribution because we don't really need to cover that today, but let's start on the what. So here you get the writing highlighted again. So it's a written communication that reports brief information about an event or a circumstance or a product launch or something else that's happening. Typically, it promotes something significant and specific and does it clearly, organized, succinct, and to the point. That's among a range of definitions I've found. Doing what we all do these days and having a little look online to see what other people say. But for me, the key is the writing. That's not me.
If everybody could just put themselves on mute, that would be great. Thank you.
It could have been me, but it wasn't. So as to the why, so there are lots of good reasons for doing PR. I can't see you all now because of course I've put this on screen share, but I think a few of you, certainly Bronya, you write press releases already. I think putting them into their context, they're kind of a very useful part of the marketing mix, which sometimes get overlooked, which I think, again, some of you have almost acknowledged that you don't use PR and don't write press releases. Their primary role really is to help you reach new markets because you're going into publications or online media where you'll be talking to people that don't already know you. However, they have another role, which is to reinforce your messages amongst your existing audiences. And you'll have heard talk of things like the rule of 7, which is about how you need to get your messages out via different media at different times, and increasingly more, in fact, in order to make people sit up and take notice. And as you said, Laura, to make them take action. When I say dovetails with content marketing is very much the way that a lot of us plan our marketing in an online age, and it's based very much on coming up with the content and then pushing that out through various channels. So writing a press release can be, it can almost be a way of creating some of that content, where it gives you a discipline to, like if you kept thinking you might get around to writing a blog or an article and you hadn't got around to it, you could potentially make these two things happen at the same time. I'll say a bit more about that later as well. And then I think the key thing is that it doesn't cost very much to do, especially if you can do it yourself, if you enjoy writing, and if you follow a process, which are, well, a structure. So when to do it is primarily when you have news, but it's incredible how creative you can be with what constitutes news. Actually, I'll say this in a minute. No, I'll say it now. So one of our Lymington.com clients, which is, as has been pointed out, Colton Care, they're almost their entire marketing strategy is based on PR. They're particularly keen not to get dragged into the world of social media, where so much comment arises, because they feel that they are in a sensitive place in the market. Sensitive place in regard to so many people have strong opinions about all sorts of things to do with care homes, and individual stories can get blown out of proportion. So what they do is they turn all sorts of little stories around their homes into press releases, and they push those out across their region, because they're southern based, so they're using going across all the regional media for the south. And in Lymington.com, they actually have a sort of sitting medium, because that's part of our arrangement with them, that we top and tail their stories and make them a little bit more suitable to our market, and then publish them and then promote them. So this is a key thing about press releases, and typically you will be told that your target market has got to be the journalists, and you're trying to get the attention of journalists to make them take notice of what you want to say, and make them think that it would be relevant to the market that is going to be reading their publication, and or possibly have a community benefit to them. So the primary market for a press release is typically the journalist, and then almost like the secondary market, but that's what you're actually writing about is then you're trying to embrace and enthuse your own target market, whoever it might be. But where I highlighted at the beginning of this, local and regional, it's quite useful to know that if you're primarily marketing locally, you will find that you don't have to work so hard with the journalists to get something published, because they're always going to be wanting relevant local news. And to a certain extent, I think the same applies in the very vertical sectors, so sort of narrow industry sectors. So finally, these are the kind of component parts of the press release. So in the headline, you will be trying to be descriptive and engaging, but nothing more than that. You're not trying to be clever or funny, because that won't necessarily create the right impression. So short, sharp, and try and think about something a bit topical or a little bit, a big number or something that will make it look tempting. And then in the first sentence, or at least the first paragraph, this is where you do a summary. And it's really important that you do this, because lots of people won't read all the way through. Certainly lots of journalists won't, but actually lots of people reading the article won't either. So what you really want to do is get across does anybody know what I mean by those 5 W's? Come on, marketers. Go on then, Vicky.
Who, what, why, where, and how, is it?
No, it was when, I think.
Oh, right.
But yes, exactly. That is the key thing. It's the facts of the matter. And they won't all always be relevant, but any that are, that's what you want to put in there. And I always say, tell them what you're going to tell them, because when I learned long ago about all sorts of things to do with marketing and presentations and so on, that was always that we were always told, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Well, in this instance, you don't really need to tell them what you told them, but it's a useful way of thinking about how you're going to construct what you're going to write. Then the body of the press release will be the story itself, whatever it is. And I'll mention this later, but it's a good idea if you can to get quotes into it, because it just breaks up the content. And even if you have to make up the quote and then attribute it, there are lots of ways of doing quotes. You'll always be trying to include some kind of a call to action, because in a way, somebody said they always wondered, is it advertising? Well, it kind of is. But you're going about it in a slightly different way. So you're telling about something factual, and you're telling it in a reasonably factual way, a truthful way, but you are definitely allowed to add in a reason why people might want to get in touch about it. And then you've got the magic boilerplate. So boilerplate is it's the notes to journalists, or the editorial note. It's the factual part about your business. And this is another really useful thing to get used to writing, because it's a very good discipline to help you to sum up in writing as succinctly as you can what the business does for whom. And a bit of background. I'm going to show you a couple of examples in a minute. And then finally, obviously, you need a contact. So here's a few headlines. The Santa Dash last year, of course, well, I'll show you that in a minute, but of course it couldn't be a live one. Air Pit is deep into gym equipment. Oh, here we are. Here's a little bit about the last year's Santa Dash. So the facts at the beginning, bit of background, bit more information, a little hint at how difficult funding is, bit more background. You get the idea. It's it's light, but it's factual. This is another one. This is a very emotional story. They kind of go off the page, but I think you get the idea. So here is a typical boilerplate presented as a note to journalists. So it tries to sum up in as few words as possible. I mean, this is about as long as you would want a boilerplate to be. And in fact, the next one I'm going to show you is even longer and probably a bit too long. But there aren't any hard and fast rules about this. This is the one for the gym people. Okay. So hopefully, I've kind of covered all this, but as a summary, so you're going to try and keep it brief. You're going to grab attention with headline. I didn't mention about the release date. Lots of press releases say for immediate release or for release on a certain date, because if it's something which is a very newsy, that's a typical technique in press releases, that you ask editors to keep it till the right day and announce it on the right day. Get the facts across in the first paragraph, expand the story but keep it lean, include quotes, add the profile, include photos where possible. Coming back to the writing, you do try as hard as you can to make sure that the style flows, and obviously that you don't have spelling and grammar mistakes. And then you send it by email to your contacts. And then the final thing I was going to say was, this is to do with this crossing over of content. So quite often, if you are booking advertising, particularly in one of the local magazines, if you book enough advertising, they will then offer you some free editorial. So writing a kind of press release incorporating the boilerplate is quite a good way of thinking about writing your editorial. I think I've finished. Shall I stop sharing? Yes, I'll stop sharing. So I hope that was sort of what people were expecting to see.
It was perfect. Thank you, Jane. So now we'll open up the floor. I'm sure there's questions. Feel free to ask anything that you like, relevant to obviously what we just talked about.
And any of the marketers can answer.
So Phil's hand up.
Hey, thanks for that. That's interesting. Is it, because I still think of sort of, they're very much like an advert, and with an advert you're sort of running something maybe every week or that kind of thing. Is it sort of feasible to run a press release every 3 months type of thing, you know, and almost think of an event to run that you could publicize as opposed to doing it the other way around? Does that make sense?
It definitely is. I mean, I mentioned Colton Care earlier. At least one a week comes out.
Wow.
So they're looking for a story to turn into a press release, which can get across some of the messages of care, compassion, company, comfort.
I think you've frozen.
We lost Jane.
Either that or she's just very good at standing really still.
All right. Well, I'll jump in.
Ren Kitchen's advert.
I'll jump in because I find it very difficult to stay quiet anyway. But as far as press releases
She's
are
back. She's back.
sorry, Jane, you froze there for a second.
Oh, right. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You can now, yeah.
I've just had a little message up to say that it's unstable. I might just change frequencies. Did you want to say something, Vicky, while I'm trying to do that?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say, with regard to thinking of press releases as advertising, I'd be a little bit careful about that, because press releases, the mechanism is to try and get your story to a journalist, and that could be in a trade magazine, a national newspaper, a local newspaper, and the idea is that you write content which is going to appeal to their audience, as Jane said in her talk. That's making the job of the journalist easier, in that they've got a whole paper or magazine to fill. So the job of the press release writer or sender is to ensure that you are on point and have the correct content for that magazine or newspaper. Otherwise, you're just going to irritate them, and you'll have the converse effect, if you see what I mean. So if you make it too promotional or too salesy, that will not be very good for you. So it does need to be newsworthy. It needs to be content that's going to be relevant to whoever's going to be reading that publication that you're sending your content to. An advertorial is that halfway bridge between an advert, which is buy my stuff today / sale, whatever that might be, and editorial, which is what the journalist will write on your behalf.
But you will pay for that more or less the same as you'll pay for advertising.
Yes, but I'm just trying to explain the three different things.
Yeah, so it will look different to a typical advertisement, but it will say advertising at the top of it, or it will say something like advertorial, or it will be clearly that. One of the things I didn't particularly say is that typically you will write a press release in the third person, so it automatically comes across as more factual. And I think, following on from what Vicky just said, Phil, what you could do is, if you could find really useful stories about how you've been able to help people with their problems, technical problems, and solve them, and that person is happy to provide a quote and to almost do your job for you of saying how great you are, you can kind of get around it without it coming across as you saying how wonderful you are, if you see what I mean. So
and
you've got to be really clever how you write it.
You could anchor it, for example, in your example, Phil, to the rise in home working, and how that's, and the statistics around how, went through the pandemic, you've seen a rise in home working, which has resulted in more need for your services by X%. So if you're going for a newspaper, they love stats and facts, and third-party endorsement. So if you wanted to put a quote in from one of your customers, that would be very well received as well, because it's not you saying you're good, it's somebody else saying you're good. So that's we call that third-party endorsement.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Does anybody else have any
Who else
questions?
would like to say
Alice,
anything?
hi.
So can you use a testimonial then as a press release?
Give me an example. Give us an example. I think.
Well, I don't know. Say someone has written back to us and said they've had a fabulous holiday and they really enjoyed it and it's the best one ever and the kids loved it and the granny thought it was marvelous and blah 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 blah. Can you turn that into a press release?
I think you could probably incorporate it in a press release, but it doesn't sound to me as though that would make a press release. With a press release, you're really trying to build a story. You're trying to tell something. You're trying to create something which looks as if it should be in the publication, because it is actually newsworthy. And
okay, sorry to interrupt. We have a family. We have 3 generations of family that have bought caravans and holidayed at Holborn year after year after year. Now that is a story.
Yes, I think that probably is. Yeah.
Okay.
Put a number in. How many years?
And also picking up, as Vicky said about the growth in home working, I think the whole subject, which is bound to come to the fore again this year, of staycationing, or at least staying relatively local in that context. So you'd want to again, like Vicky said, you'd want to have some facts in there.
Rob said how many years, and
so you still really should be thinking about that structure. And if you think about those 5 W's, or as many of them are as relevant as are relevant, that's a good way to get started. It's really important that you follow that structure.
Okay, thank you.
Who else? Come on.
Claire's got a hand up.
Oh, hi.
This Claire?
Oh, hello, Claire.
Oh no, it's gone now.
Okay, so my thinking is about calls to action, Jane. Perhaps some really sort of unique and different calls to action. Obviously, everybody says visit our website, or come and shop with us, or follow us on social media, or sign up for our newsletter. So it'd be really interesting to think of really interesting calls to action that are a bit different, not quite so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I would have thought you've got some lovely ones just by citing some of your members and the fantastic things that they make and enticing people to try them. Which could in themselves generate different types. I mean, it would still be the same type of call to action, but you could certainly be using slightly different words then.
Yeah, you
I
can
would
just say,
as Rob's just put in the chat, you know, buy some New Forest shortbread or more, you know, Tracy, that you could come up with the most amazing words for your shortbread. And the fact that, so Claire, in a press release about the mark, you could even say that Tracy does those little sample packs. And if you arranged it with her, she'd probably agree that you could say that if people wanted to have one, she would send them one.
the other thing, Claire,
what about sorry,
I was just going to say, you could, to make it newsworthy and relevant to now, you could say, make it your New Year's resolution to have at least one New Forest mark product in your shopping on a weekly basis, or something like that, just to anchor it to something that's relevant now. Just utilize, when we do content planning, we tend to look at all the days in the year, depending on what kind of business it is. If it's B2C, business to consumer, you'd look at Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, all of these little key events throughout the year. If it's business to business, it would be probably a bit more business orientated, maybe the budget, for example, or something, depending on what your industry you're in. And then that gives you sometimes a little excuse to reach out to somebody, or a journalist or a magazine, with an article that's relevant to what's going on at the moment. So the other thing to think about is, if you're going to do that, so for example, you wanted to be in, you had products that you wanted to be in a Christmas list. So, you know, the magazines around November, December start to suggest presents. You have to think about that in June. You have to be pitching that in June, maybe even May, because that's when all of the Christmas lists get put to bed. So you've really got to plan if you're going to do that in a strategic way, and think about things in advance.
I'm so glad you said that, Vicky, because usually I'm on my hobby horse of the first thing is to have your plan. And of course, all this fits into your overall plan. And this is something that you can, PR is something that a lot of you could consider including in your mix. But absolutely, you know, everybody should have a plan, even if it's just a hand-drawn one, but it's got an idea of timing and what you plan to do. And very often, yes, whatever industry you're in, there will be times of the year when certain things are more sensible to do for you. So that would, you know, that the seasons will play a part in your planning. And this is really just about how, if you can write a press release, then you can bring a bit more PR into that communications plan.
and I think
I'm just trying to read Rob's note. Yeah.
It was.
Sorry,
It's in the chat.
Tracy's got a question.
Well, it was more of a comment, really, because I'm so sales orientated, because I've always been in sales. I've sold a lot of advertising, and in this day and age, I'm not sure the advertising works. So I've spent quite a lot of money in previous businesses on advertorials. But when I'm writing a press release, I struggle so much not to sell. And really good press releases are not selling. They're telling a story, getting the points over, and I do back up the selling. But when I write them initially, I'm just too heavy-handed with the selling.
It's hard. It is hard.
Well, I'm afraid we're probably all guilty of the same thing. I mean, how can we help it? We're marketers, you know. That's what we're trying to do is promote our clients and promote their wares. And actually, it is okay. It's just getting that balance. It's a fine line, you know. To some extent, you just have to say a bit of it, because you've got to get your points across.
Indeed. Claire, did you have something else that you wanted to say? Sorry.
no, I was just one of the things that's on my list of notes that I made while Jane was talking, where do things like competitions or chance to win, does that fall into your call to action, or your sort of, I'm trying to think of ways to suggest to people when they're writing their press releases how they might move away from being too just salesy and have a bit of a carrot to dangle in front of people?
Well, certainly, because anything that they can offer, which is actually genuinely giving something, is going to be welcomed. But again, it's a question of balance and tone.
Yeah.
So, and I'd come back to the structure again, because if you follow the structure and you get the facts in, you will create the right context to be able to pop in those nice warm bits.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really useful.
The other Claire, did you put your hand up just then?
You did.
Hi, yeah, I did. We kind of are aware that a lot of businesses have their insurance renewal dates due in the 1st of April. So with that in mind, would it be a good idea to say offer a complimentary insurance review at that sort of time, or is that too?
Definitely. I mean, I would say that's definitely part of your communication, your marketing plan, your communications plan. How you communicate it via, a variety of different methods is another consideration. I mean, fortunately for you, you can probably direct market to some of those businesses. If you can make it relevant and related to the fact of that timing, then yes, you definitely could construct a press release around it as well. So if you start thinking about all the various methods that you have at your disposal to get your message out there, and put press release into that kind of shopping list, and then consider it with that with that thinking of how it has to be factual and it has to be of interest to the end reader of a publication, then yes, you can.
What's the crossover between so on Instagram, which I struggle with anyway, but we're trying to mention where we supply, where you can buy New Forest shortbread. So it's featuring buy local in the new year, don't just buy local at Christmas and that sort of thing. But is there some, in a press release, could you collaborate with other people? Or would you be diluting what you're trying to do? Like Flora and I doing a press release to promote.
No, you definitely could.
Rather than it just being generic, so very specific.
Yeah, you definitely could. If you can together construct something which is going to be of genuine interest, then yes, there are no rules against collaboration.
No, we do it all the time. So big businesses doing partnerships together, running initiatives together, launching a new product together.
That's as a press release.
Yes.
Using that as the subject.
Yeah.
Let's do it, Tracy.
I mean, you should. Jane and I will look at it for you. There we go. You should also think about whether a press release is really what you need. So if, for example, in your case that you just mentioned, Tracy, a piece of editorial in the Leamington Times would be the absolute panacea of what you need to achieve. You don't need to write a generic press release. You need to write to Ben, who's the editor, a story. So there's a different format. The output will hopefully be the same, which is you would gain editorial in the Leamington Times, but the approach is slightly different. Jane, I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, yes, I mean, that last example that I showed of the TEG Motor Company Christmas greeting, that was agreed with the editor that they would run that piece of editorial. And the reason in that instance was because advertising had also been paid for. But if you've got something really interesting to talk about, it definitely, with our local press particularly, it's definitely worth giving the editor a call and saying, I've got this idea. Would you publish this, and how would you like me to craft it? And then you'll find they will give you a word count, which will be quite strict, and it will mean you'll have to write even more cleverly than you would have done if you were just writing a press release.
Something for Flora. So I mean, this is very specific again to Flora and I, but that lovely article that went in Hampshire Life about the awards was amazing, and I instantly thought, I got to send them a press release because I supply Flora, And that, I mean, I haven't had the time to get round to it, but that to me would have been perfect. Follow that on with the editor.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Paul, and I'm one of the suppliers, and
Paul will hopefully agree with this, that photographic resources in publications, especially local newspapers, is thin on the ground these days, getting thinner by the minute. So if you can provide imagery to accompany your story, that's also a really good thing. To your case in point, Tracy, when we sent that to Hampshire Living, we sent them a smorgasbord of images to use, some more formal, some less formal, because it was more for their diary pages. So you've got to think about that. Paul, would you agree that imagery is really helpful as well to a story?
Absolutely. It can. I mean, the image will be the difference between the story being at the bottom of the page to the story being at the top of the page and being the main story on the page. So it's really important to get a good picture. Also, just going back to Alice's idea with the different generations, you can appeal to different platforms within a publication or with different publications. So we've got the 3 generations. It's really important to have a picture from that first, the first generation that actually came to Holborn, and then get them all going through. So there you can sit on the news page. I mean, Alice may be able to tie it in with increased visitor numbers through staycations and that kind of thing on the news page. But also there's the heritage pages in the newspapers and on the websites, and having those old pictures, they absolutely love those kind of things, so to draw people onto their heritage pages and always looking for that kind of thing. And of course that will also be a trade platform as well, because all the different trade platforms you'd have with the holiday companies would like that as well. But yeah, pictures really important. Obviously I'll say get a professional picture done, because
obviously
that'll push you further forward in the paper as well. But a good picture generally. And sometimes if your press release isn't quite as strong as it could be,
a picture might lift it
between it being used or not.
Yeah,
so if you've got a story that's all right, it's okay, but but
a fantastic picture.
But if you've got a really good picture to go with it, then you'll definitely be be in a good chance of getting it published. And of course, there's different platforms as well. You can make your social media a little bit more advertising, whereas you've got to be very careful when you send into newspapers and magazines and that kind of thing as well, that make sure that you've got a really good news angle, like James.
Yeah. Claire, just coming back to your insurance watershed, if you like. I don't know whether there's any new legislation coming out with regard to insurance. So last year or the year before, when we had the stamp duty hiatus, for example, that was very newsworthy, and we did some work for a firm of solicitors in and around that news. So if there's anything that you could hang your story on with relate to new legislation or something coming out in the budget that might be relevant.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because there's always things coming out all the time that are changing, but you want to pick something as exciting as you can get, insurance speak, so something that is maybe going to benefit.
Well, it's going to appeal to, let's stay with the Livington Times, for example, the business pages. If it's a relevant story for those readers, for that section of the paper, then that might give you a better chance of getting in it.
Yeah.
If you notice what I try and do in Weekly What's On, because Weekly What's On for Livington.com is like a kind of giant PR machine anyway. And quite often when we've got clients like solicitors and independent financial advisors, I'm always trying to find a little angle which is either related to the moment, something that's very relevant right now, or else some other way of making it sound a little bit more interesting than, quite frankly, it is otherwise. Because
definitely, that's helpful.
Different platforms as well. You'd write something differently for the news pages as you would for business pages. You can get away with a little bit more on the business pages. Do you agree, Jane?
Yes, I do agree. Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because even though we're supposed to have much shorter attention spans than we used to, actually, if the if the subject material is relevant to the reader, then the reader will read it, and that applies very much into that more. That's what I meant by kind of vertical markets, really. But yeah,
brilliant. Well, we're coming to the top of the hour. Does anybody else have any burning questions they want to squeeze in last minute? Carlton.
So in the past, we've tried talking to the Daily Echo, and bless their cottons, I might as well talk to the table. How do I woo the editor over, or is it do I have to deal with them in the same way as I would deal a new customer? I've got to woo them, or how do I break that glass ceiling?
Gosh, that's really interesting, because I remember. Do you remember we met many years ago with the expo, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I always thought you used to tell such a fantastic story about what you do and the opportunities that you provide. It should be of interest.
Yeah.
I would say don't go to the top. Work your way.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Go to staff writer.
Go to Darren Slade, the business editor, and he'll be a lot more communicative, shall we say.
And maybe he would help Carlton to actually find more of an angle.
To craft it, yeah. Because he wants more stories, because the resources they've got, I mean, as Vicky was saying, photographic resources are just completely decimated now. I mean, I used to have 10, 11 staff in Southampton, and now there isn't anyone.
Wow.
So it's just absolutely crazy. So they have people sending in pictures. So you've got a good chance with sending in your press releases and everything, because they're desperate for content.
With regard to Darren, follow him on LinkedIn as well. He's very active on LinkedIn, so you'll get a sense of what he likes as well.
They really do want you to send things in, so they'll be quite able, and they've got a lot less staff now generally as well. So and the editors have changed a lot over the last year or two anyway. So aim for Darren, and I'm sure, as Jane says, I'm sure he'll help. If you need anything, Darren Slade.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. That was a fantastic conversation. Lots of chat. Thank you so much, Jane. That was brilliant. I think the fact that we've had 30 odd minutes of discussion is testament to the fact that it's a subject that people are really interested in. So
yeah, it really is, isn't it? I mean, it's quite interesting how much of a chord it seems to have struck.
Yeah,
and how lots of people were obviously thinking about it already.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So it falls to me to say thank you very much, everybody. Next week, the 19th, the Zoom is going to be with Lizzie Cooper from the Solent Apprenticeships, hosted by one of our other directors, Heidi. So if you are in the need for any apprenticeships or are interested in the subject matter, please do come along to that next one. All of the upcoming New Forest Business Partnership events are on our website, which you'll know because you booked in for today, but please do go and have a look. Thank you so much for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.